Ladies and gentlemen, please rise to receive your Chair, Vice Chair and Chief Executive.
Thank you all for joining us. Please remain standing whilst my chaplain, Reverend Laura Handy, leads us in prayer.
Good evening. If I haven't met you before, I'm Laura from over in Droitwich. It's lovely to see some familiar faces. I'm going to help us take a moment to pause before there will be lots of words tonight, to take a moment to be still and perhaps to just call to mind the people who you seek to serve, the communities that you represent, and the responsibilities, perhaps, that you hold. Shall we be still together? Almighty God, as we gather here tonight, we bring before you and call to mind once more the people who we seek to serve. We thank you for all those who contribute to our communities. Help us to play our part and use our gifts and experience for the good of others. We pray particularly tonight for those who are in need, those who need comfort, strength, and healing. We pray for our world. We ask your blessing upon all who work for peace. We ask that you will give wisdom to all who take counsel for the nations of the earth. And finally, Lord, I ask you to bless the members of this council. Keep them steadfast and united, that they may govern wisely and well. Help them to conduct matters of business and serve with fairness and right thought and speech. Give them wisdom so the business under discussion may reach a successful conclusion for the good of all. We pray this in your mighty name. Amen. Amen. Have a good meeting, ladies and gentlemen. Take care.
Thank you, Laura, and please all be seated. We go next on to declarations of interest. We go next on to item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any to announce? Seeing none, we go next on to apologies for absence. Could we have those, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillors Arnold, Hartley, Herdman, Kearsey, P. Knight and Sims.
Thank you. And seeing no other hands around the room, we go next on to minutes of the previous meeting. I'm happy to propose these as correct. Could I have a seconder?
Happy to second those, Chairman.
Thank you. This takes us next on to my first announcement as your chair, and in the first 2 months, it's been quite an interesting one. Getting set in the role as chair has made for an exciting 9 weeks since our last meeting of the full council. It has been a busy couple of months for the whole country, having faced a general election. Congratulations to our returning members of Parliament, Nigel Huddleston and Harriet Baldwin, as well as new member Chris Blaw. Congratulations are also in order for our own council member Bradley Thomas for his election to the seat for Bromsgrove. The election especially caused a stir in the offices of Wychavon as the presiding local authority, with officers across the council making up the election team, who have our thanks for administering an excellent election, as do all the presiding officers who staffed polling stations across the district. As Bromsgrove gains a great MP, we lose a great councillor with the resignation of Bradley, and also in a strong commitment to another role, we have the resignation of Philippa Capel. I hope you will all join me in wishing them great success. And in my own 9 weeks, I have attended 25 functions, starting with a refreshing show of talent at the Droitwich Fire Cadets passing parade, before getting drenched at the Royal Garden Party. The Falklands Veterans Cycling event raised funds across the country, and the Mayor of Evesham hosted an introduction for civic members from across our local counties. Thank you, Robbie. Though communities across the district held events to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day, I was only able to attend one, and would like to thank the Droitwich Spa Town Council and Museum for the range of activities they hosted throughout the day for the residents of Droitwich. Despite a delay to the Wychavon Connection Day, I have been able to explore the extent of our offices with our Chief Officer, Vic Allison, meeting the teams that keep our services running. The Evesham Baptist Church hosted us at the opening day for their new community centre, and a new community hall was opened in Tiverton. Unfortunately, I caused some confusion, thinking I would have to miss it, so kindly Vic stood in. It was an honour to help voice the appreciation for Wychavon through the raising of our Armed Forces Day flag and supporting the signing of the Armed Forces Covenant at Norton Barracks. And later that week, I spoke to the Droitwich Probus 87 Club and attended Armed Forces Day flag raising at Droitwich. I was grateful as well to attend the Prince Henry's High School art show and later their summer concert. And in our most recent week, I lived a lifelong ambition at Hartlebury Castle, taking a spade to the ground and archaeological dig site, while seeing the skill-building opportunities such activities could offer our younger residents. On the way back from this, at the John Paul Phillips Art Study Centre in Bishampton, I met an excellent local artist to explore opportunities for more great local art around our district. And finishing my recent explorations, I presented awards at Glover's Peace School and celebrated the achievements of their graduating students. The invite to Glover's Peace School coming from more than my teaching role there. The family-run charity that stemmed the school is one of the earliest sources of my civic pride and has always been a place I have enjoyed sharing. As such, it is a pleasure to host my civic service there on the 8th of September, and hope you will all be able to join me. This being the end of my chair's announcements, we now go on to item 6, public participation. I'd like to invite Mr. Gary Fowles to introduce the petition.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Wychavon Council about the continuing genocide in Gaza. Yesterday, over 50 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli military in targeted airstrikes in south and central Gaza. Nearly half the Palestinians killed were seeking shelter in the IDF-designated Al-Mawazi humanitarian zone. In addition, the BBC reported last night that a 24-year-old Palestinian man called Mohammed Bar, who suffered from Down syndrome and autism and did not understand what was happening in Gaza, had been savaged by Israeli military dogs in his own home and left to die as his family were arrested or removed. His family found his body days later. These events are happening now, 10 months after the atrocity of the Hamas attack on October the 7th last year, which killed over 1,200 Israeli citizens. The current death toll among Palestinians is approaching 40,000. On the 1st of June this year, I organised a petition in Pershore High Street, which asked our MP, Harriet Baldwin, to persuade her colleagues to support 3 simple requests made in the petition. These were: 1, an immediate and continuing ceasefire by all military participants in Gaza. 2, the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas and the Israeli state. And 3, the immediate restoration of humanitarian aid and emergency food supplies to Gaza. In a little over an hour, we collected over 100 signatures from local people who were angry and concerned over the deaths, injuries, and starvation of ordinary, innocent Palestinian people. This response clearly showed that many people in Pershore do not have a voice to challenge the then government, the Labour Party, and military establishment about the actions we sanction and support in Gaza, which allow Israel to continue the genocide. The petition letter was also published in the Evesham Journal. Harriet Baldwin replied to the petition by stating that, "Of course, I wish to see the hostages released, a ceasefire from both sides, and better humanitarian access." My question to the Council is, will you please support our petition and consider how the Wychavon Council can try to influence the decision makers supporting the Gaza genocide? Thank you for listening.
Thank you for presenting the context to your petition. Just to be clear, a petition to the Council rather than a question. Would you like to come up and present it to me?
Are you speaking to me?
Yes, sorry. Would you like to come up and present the petition? You've got to come up and hand it to me.
No, I would not. Sorry. I would not, because I don't have the petition, and the petition was done 3-4 weeks ago. But people signed the petition because of their wish to do so on an understanding that I wouldn't share that. So Harriet Baldwin has it.
I'm afraid that means that you...
No, I'm sorry. You registered under the participation scheme to say that you had a petition to present.
I never asked to be registered under that, and I never asked for the petition to be considered. I'm asking a question about Wychavon's attitude to the Gaza situation.
You didn't,
that was very clear.
So we didn't have that. We had you registered with the petition. So, and I understand that you put in a question, but it came in after the question time. So
I never put a petition in. I put in a question. I put in a second question, which, because it went in at 2 minutes past 10, rather than at 10 o'clock, you refused to accept. This is a question to the Council to do something. It's very clear.
Well, a lot of the matters you've raised that I'm sure many in this room have sympathy for are beyond the powers of Wychavon. I would be very happy to ask our officers to get back to you with an answer for the question, because, as has been said, this was brought to us as a petition rather than a question. So I can ask our officers to return to you with a question at a later date, but we don't have that as a question that's been posed to us. Similar issues are addressed by a notice of motion later in this agenda, which you're welcome to stay and listen to, but not to participate in, if that's what you desire.
I quite understand why this situation has arisen. I asked to present the results of the petition, which I'd taken amongst the people of Pershore. I didn't ask for you to consider my petition under the rulings that you have in place. Okay? So it was very simple. It was to respond to the 3 points which were on the petition, not the petition itself. The petition was not directed towards you, it was directed towards Harriet Baldwin, who replied. So I don't see how I could.
But that seems quite like that seems like quite a separate issue. If you're making a petition to someone else and asking us to reference it, I would have to see the original contact. But that sounds like you said you had a petition that you wanted us to consider in some way, whichever way you wanted us to consider it. You mentioned there was a petition that you wanted us to take into account in some way, and that sounds like you wanted to present a petition. If you want us to take a petition into account, it's something that we would need to see. As I've said, the matter is also largely addressed by motion later in this agenda put forward by councillors in this room, which you're welcome to stay and listen to, but that would be beyond the public participation portion of this meeting.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. That's very disappointing.
Wonderful. So, next we go on to petitions of motion from the council.
Members will note that there are two notices of motion on the agenda for this evening. The first notice of motion is withdrawn for today as the member bringing that notice cannot join us this evening.
Which brings us to the second notice of motion from Councillor Nicola Morris in relation to Palestine. Councillor Morris, would you like to read your notice of motion?
Thank you. Good evening, fellow councillors. I hope my proposed motion speaks for itself. In case it doesn't, before you respond, please consider the following. Firstly, in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Within 9 days of that invasion, the Worcester Evening News published an article which referred to a statement posted on Wychavon Council's website by the then leader, Councillor Bradley Thomas. All of us have been horrified at the scenes we have been witnessing in Ukraine. Councillor Thomas went on to state, I have also asked for the Ukrainian flag to be flown outside the Civic Centre from next week as a token of our support and solidarity for the people of Ukraine. Last week, I attempted to discover why Wychavon Council has neither publicly commented on the horrific scenes we are all witnessing in Palestine, nor offered a token of support and solidarity for civilians in Palestine. Secondly, discrimination is the treatment of a person or a particular group of people differently in a way that is worse than the way people are usually treated. We as a council have, to my knowledge, neither publicly commented on the horrific scenes we are all witnessing in Palestine, nor offered a token of support and solidarity for civilians in Palestine. It is my hope that you will all, therefore, wish, as I do, to address this omission by supporting my proposed motion unanimously. My motion. This council rejects all forms of racism and condemns the increase in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic abuse in the UK, not least because it is encouraging the rise of far-right ideology. Despite this rejection, this council has, however, so far failed to give Palestinian civilians the same expression of support as it afforded Ukrainian civilians in March 2022. Namely, a public statement of support and sympathy and the flying of the Ukraine flag over the Civic Centre. This council resolves to address this by offering the same support or equivalent to Palestinian civilians as it offered to Ukrainian civilians back in March 2022. Thank you.
And do we have a seconder?
Yes, I'd like to second the motion. I wish to add that since October 2023, when the conflict began, over a dozen local UK councils from Aberdeen to Somerset have passed motions asking the previous government to press for an immediate, permanent ceasefire or humanitarian ceasefire, a two-state political solution, even an end to arms sales to Israel. This motion today is modest by comparison, and the conflict and suffering continue. But if passed, it can serve as our message to the new government. Thank you.
Thank you. And I understand we have an amendment. Could I have the proposer for that, please? Thank you.
So thank you for bringing this motion to council, and I've just got a little bit to say before I do bring the amendment to you. So this council stands and supports the aim to achieve peace in the Middle East. Ronald Reagan once said, peace is not absence of conflict, it is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means, and that is what we here at Wychavon advocate for. We condemn violence and object to all forms of racism. We as a local authority are here to provide a ballast to the community we serve. It is not within our jurisdiction to pick sides, and our time should be focused on supporting the work of the Home Office and the United Nations in trying to secure a ceasefire and an end to the conflict. I want to confirm to members that this is something we have long advocated for. We here at Wychavon want to ensure any residents impacted directly by global conflict can access the right support and advice, and we will continue to offer signposting to our local partners who are best placed to provide effective support, something we have been doing for a long, long time. Just to clarify a couple of details within the original proposal and comments made by Councillor Morris, the support for Ukraine was the policy of the UK government at the time, and we had been asked to show our support and follow national schemes. In this case, the government has not picked a side. That's why we have chosen to remain neutral on this matter. Our Homes for Ukraine staff do an amazing job, but are funded by government money. I did raise the question with our director in terms of whether that similar level of support could be offered to Palestinian and Israeli citizens and residents of Wychavon. Unfortunately, that funding is directly restricted to Ukraine from a national level. In relation to the flying of flags is controlled by legislation. As a Palestinian flag is not the flag of a state recognised by the UK, it would be unlawful of us to fly the flag without relevant planning permission. And as a council, we cannot agree to act unlawfully. We must remember we also act as the local planning authority, so as a council can't make any further comment on this matter at this time. Thank you. So our amendment would be that we reject all forms of racism and condemn any type of anti-Semitic and Islamophobic abuse in the UK.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for this?
I'll press the right button. Chairman, I'm very happy to second and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Before we go to a vote on the amendment first, before voting on the original motion, are there any other speakers? Not seeing any. Would you care to speak, Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to follow up really on what Councillor Birch has said, and just to confirm that the intent of this amendment is to provide us with a motion that I hope we can all support. It is right that we as a council call out the evils that we see of both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and a motion, and this is therefore a motion that I believe we can all support. The original motion, I believe, unfortunately lends itself to being little more than a political statement. It conflates the issue of the support that was offered by the UK government and by this council to Ukrainian refugees with the situation in Gaza. We have all seen the horrific scenes in Gaza. We all also saw the horrific and abhorrent scenes on the 7th of October last year. After the invasion of the Ukrainian state by Russia, another sovereign state, the UK government set up a scheme to welcome Ukrainian refugees to the UK. And we as a local authority participated in that scheme. We flew the flag of Ukraine as a statement of support for those residents, a statement of welcome to those residents. Rightly or wrongly, there has been no similar scheme set up in relation to the residents of Gaza. And therefore, it is not appropriate for us to fly the Palestinian flag in support of residents who arguably may not even exist. At the time of the last census, there were 96 people of Arab ethnicity registered, according to the census, in Wychavon. If you look at the proportion of the population of Arab states, the Palestinian state represents about 1.17% of the total Arab population in the world. It's therefore exceedingly possible that there are in fact no Gazan residents actually in Wychavon for whom this will be a statement of support. Instead, this will be seen solely as a political statement. A political statement which, as has already been said, is unlawful in that we are unable to fly the flag of an organisation that is not a sovereign state. And sadly, despite, I'm sure, the very best intentions of those who have put forward this motion, would be seen as a statement of support by this council of a proscribed terrorist organisation. And that is not something that we as a council can do. The amendment, therefore, allows us to call out the evils that we all see, the evils that we see, sadly, too frequently in this country, and I'm sure across Wychavon, and allows us to state clearly how abhorrent we find those evils, and that we oppose both the evil of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and therefore I commend it to you.
Thank you. So I've seen a hand rise from Councillor Boatwright Green, and then one moment. So we'll see Councillor Boatwright Green first, then Wilkins, and then Councillor Morris has a right of return, and then we'll take it to the vote of the amendment unless there are any burning other questions.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, mine's probably more of a point of order. I just want clarification on something here. So what I have in front of me, this sentence, is replacing the entire motion. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilkins.
Thank you. Hearing many points here today, I think I would just like to comment specifically on the comparison between Palestine and Ukraine. Ukraine never attacked Russia before it was invaded. Ukraine did not invade Russia and slaughter 1,139 people and kidnap 51 more. Ukrainians did not dance and parade corpses in the street in celebration of an attack. Any comparison between Ukraine and Palestine is disgusting and offensive to the Ukrainian people who are suffering such persecution. Furthermore, I wish to state we have seen a dramatic rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes since this Palestinian attack against Israel, and we have seen a dramatic rise in attacks from left-wing and pro-Palestinian organisations. For this reason, I believe your comparison between racism and discrimination and purely right-wing groups is, again, a disgusting lie and just wrong, basically, which is why I'm very happy to support the amendment, because obviously discrimination and racism on anyone from any side is wrong, but to claim it as exclusively right-wing is also wrong. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to comment to in any way change this motion before we go back to Councillor Morris's right of reply? Seeing Councillor Tucker.
I'm a bit confused, and I'm sorry about that. But we're talking about at the moment we're talking about your amendment. Number one, I'm quite surprised at an amendment that completely wipes out the original notice of motion and doesn't read in the same way at all. And I'm quite surprised that that's okay. But more importantly, I do have worries about the original notice of motion as well, which may not get discussed if the amendment goes through. The original notice of motion, I was worried that it was treating Ukraine as completely comparable to the Palestinian situation, which I don't believe to be true. And I think that the Palestinian situation is so highly complex, and particularly with the original action, and I find it very difficult to know what's right and wrong on this one. I listened carefully to what Gary Fowles was saying, and I didn't disagree with anything he actually said. I'm a bit disappointed that we can't just treat his apparent petition as a question and perhaps send a subsequent letter to him, because if we have anything to add, that would be very useful. Thank you.
I believe the Member of Public was offered a response in letter, or a response from officers. So, Councillor Morris, I believe.
Thank you. I obviously didn't explain my petition very well. I specifically only mentioned Palestinian civilians, and I am comparing Palestinian civilians to Ukrainian civilians. I wanted to lift this above the war elements of this. The reality is that Palestinian civilians are caught up in something not of their own making, and they are being linked to Hamas as though and there's the discrimination, as though every Palestinian person is equally responsible for the atrocities that are being rained down on them as a nation. And in terms of the nation state, the only 153 countries recognise Palestinian as a state. We are one of the 43, I believe it is, who don't. Palestine was a country in its own right until 1948. The more I've looked into the history of it, the more I've become alarmed that I didn't even know about it. And the more that in a similar way, I grew up at a time when the IRA were bombing mainland England. And if we learnt nothing from that, I never ever remember us calling the Irish people part of the IRA. We always made the distinction between, again, in Ireland, there were civilians unwittingly caught up in a war, essentially. And the realities of that, it was only once everyone got round the table that was resolved. And I am quite surprised at some of the comments that have been made about my motivation behind this. The only motivation I have behind this is that we are discriminating against Palestinian civilians when we are not offering them at least a measure of support. And I've kept it as open as possible. I've said or equivalent. I haven't even said what that needs to be. And I agree with Councillor Tucker. An amendment normally means you change some of the wording. It doesn't mean you completely replace the notice of motion. My final point really is that we are watching a genocide being live streamed. And lots of people said, what happened during the Second World War? What happened during the rise of Nazism? Well, lots of people looked away. That's why it happened. And we are doing exactly the same. And we are giving the Zionists carte blanche to do what they feel they are justified in doing. And I'm really sorry if that is uncomfortable here, me saying that to people. But that is the reality of it. Palestine is 50% of the population of children. Are we seriously going to end this meeting today basically saying that Palestinian children are Hamas? And I'm speechless now.
Well said.
I did see Councillor Charles Tucker hand raised, but that was the right of response at the end of a motion. I believe much of the initial wording stays the same, but as has been explained, much of the support that came for Ukrainian residents and civilians within Droitwich, or within Wychavon, was part of larger government activity. So I believe this takes us to the vote on the amendment. So could I have all those in favour for the vote on the amendment? Could we have all the... Is that counted? Sorry. Could we have all those against the amendment to the vote? And could we have all those abstaining from the amendment? So this now becomes it's carried and becomes the substantive motion. So could we have all those in favour of the new motion as in favour of the motion as amended? And anyone against? And any abstentions? Thank you. And that's carried. This brings us on to item 9, recommendations from the Executive Board.
Thank you, Chairman. There has been one meeting of the Executive Board since our last full council meeting on the 17th. Sorry, we...
One moment.
Wrong item.
So this is item 9, recommendations from Executive Board, starting with the recommissioning of the Home Improvement Service.
Thank you, Chair. We've had a members' briefing on this already, and this was at Exec Board last week. So this is the Promoting Independent Living, or PIL, service which is jointly commissioned by the 6 district councils of Worcestershire and Worcester County Council itself to carry out adaptations such as the DFGs, etc. You may also know this as the Home Improvement Agency. What we are asking for is the report to gain approval to go out to tender for the new PIL contract in August and be delegated to the authority of the Director of Communities and Housing in conjunction with the portfolio holder. This is a statutory requirement, and it's a statutory requirement using government money. I propose this.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder? Yes.
I think Councillor Della explained that very nicely, so I'll second and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
And are there any comments from councillors before this goes to the vote? I see no hands, so would you care to comment before we go to the vote? So could we have all those in favour?
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous, thank you. Bringing us on to the next recommendation for Evesham Abbey. Could we have a proposer for that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is proposed that the Wychavon take over the Abbey from Evesham Abbey Trust, the ground freehold, and there's an area there also which will be leased to the Evesham Town Council for allotments. This has come about through major work from lots and lots of volunteers in Evesham, if you haven't seen it, and also major funding from the National Heritage Lottery Fund. This paper is going forward on the agreement that we just double check with the National Lottery Heritage Fund that there's no caveats that we have to pay because of transferring the land from one trust to us. But I hope that you will back this recommendation because it's improved the area dramatically. If you haven't seen it, absolutely dramatically. It's, you know, from sounds a bit rude, but almost like a rubble area to, it's just brilliant change. So I recommend this proposal, please.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder? Councillor.
Yeah, happy to second this. Hope you will all support this evening. Thank you.
Wonderful. Any further comments from the room? If not, we'll go for all those in favour. And any abstaining? That's carried. Thank you. This brings us next on to item 10, recommendations from the Licence Committee. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. This council is required by legislation to have a statement of licensing policy which acts as the overall framework for all the licensing work that we carry out. We're also required to review that on a regular basis. The licensing committee has been conducting that review over the past few meetings, and we've now got to the point where the committee has agreed the reviewed wording, and so we're now recommending to Council that you adopt the revised wording of revised statement of licensing policy to be approved for publication to take effect from the 1st of September 2024.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Yes, I'm very happy to second this motion.
Excellent. Any further comments from the room before we go to a vote? All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. This brings us next on to reports of chairman, starting with Executive Board.
Thank you, Chairman. There has been just one meeting of the Executive Board since our last full council meeting on the 17th of April. That took place on the 10th of July. Key items of business included the approval of our draft air quality supplementary planning document for a 6-week public consultation, the transfer of land to the council from the Evesham Abbey Trust, 6 rounds of 5 community legacy grant applications and arrangements for the weekly collection of food waste from April 2026. The budget consequences of the item relating to Evesham Abbey, along with the recommissioning of the Home Improvement Agency, both required council approval, which has just now been given. In addition, we noted the Council's 2023-24 budget and Treasury Management Outturn reports, our end-of-year Signals of Success performance report for 2023-24, and a progress report on our delivery of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and Rural England Prosperity Fund. I'm delighted a report showing excellent financial and service performance for the year to 2023-2024 was shown, and in terms of the Round 5 Community Legacy Grants, I would like to congratulate Dodderhill Parish Council, Droitwich Town Council, Eckington Parish Council, Evesham Town Council, Hanbury Parish Council and Pinvin Parish Council. These councils have shared a total of £977,000 of community legacy grants from the council, and I look forward to seeing their exciting projects progress. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And unless there are any points of clarification raised by members in the room, we'll go next on to item 12, Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. There hasn't been another meeting of ONS since the last council meeting. Unfortunately, the meeting on the 3rd of July was cancelled because people had other things on their mind. But saying that, we have had a piece of work that's been undertaken since the last ONS meeting and the last council meeting, which is to review the Signals of Success report and to try and make that more approachable, more fit for purpose going forward. And we hope that the first report of this financial year will put some of that into context, and I look forward to seeing that come forward. Thank you.
That's excellent. I enjoyed my time on ONS, but did find the Signals of Success a bit unwieldy at times. Any points of clarification members would wish to raise? So we go next on to item 13, report from Chair of Chair of Planning. Apologies.
I think I prefer planning to licensing. Thank you very much. We seem to have been very busy on the planning committee. We've had three committee meetings since the last council, one actually tomorrow as well. And we've considered 18 applications, and this seems to be increasing. And these range from major applications to a lot of permission in principle applications, which seem to be now coming up to the fore. It's a lot of work for the members of the committee and the subs So I'd like to thank them specifically for their diligence. It is not an easy time for planners. I haven't read the King's speech today and the details for this government, but it's going to get harder, in my view, because the idea to build 1.5 million homes is going to require a lot more work, etc. It is a balancing act. We haven't got an SWDP review probably until sometime next year. We have a lack of housing supply, so it makes it extremely difficult, and we have refused quite a lot of applications against the officers' approval, which has made it quite difficult. But I would like to thank Kieran and the officers for spending a lot of time in training and giving us information. All I would need to say is I would encourage the members and the subs to, if an application comes up in their ward, to speak to the case officers and possibly also the developers to really look into it so that we can get over some of the things that come up at the committee, some of the basic stuff. So it does require a lot more discussion. But thank you to those members who turn up and get to everlasting. Well, the meetings seem to take a long time at the moment. And tomorrow we've got to get on a bus at 9 o'clock for those who remember to go around site visiting before the committee. But thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And unless there are any points for clarification, we'll go next on to item 14. This one is actually licensing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Licence Committee has met once since the last full council. One of the things we discussed was the review of our statement of licensing policy, which you've already voted on. Thank you very much for that. As well as that, we also looked at a review of a statement of principles with respect to the Gambling Act, which we're also required to review regularly, and a draft policy on pavement licensing, which I should add is not about licensing pavements per se. It's for cafes and bars to be able to put chairs and tables outside on the pavement in front of their premises during their hours of operation. And we also discussed a potential busking policy for Wychavon, which will be added to the work programme when officer time permits. We've also had one licensing subcommittee since last full council at which we considered 2 vehicles and 1 driver.
Thank you. Unless there are any points for clarification, we'll go next on to item 15, Member Conduct Committee.
Thank you, Chairman. There's been no formal meeting of the Member Conduct Committee since the last council meeting, but the monitoring officer has resolved a number of complaints informally and through initial assessment in consultation with the independent committee members, who I must thank for their diligence in these matters. There are currently 2 complaints being investigated. One should be concluded shortly. The committee will meet again in October unless a special hearing is required before then. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, unless anyone wants clarification, we'll go on to item 16, this being Audit Committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, we met at the end of June to discuss the management outturn report. I'm pleased to be able to inform Council that we secured a return of 5.3 million, which is a 4.5% return on our investments. We also considered the internal audit report for 23-24, and we also approved the internal audit plan for the following year. I'm delighted to be able to tell the Council that our new internal auditors, ASITs, have started their audit for 23-24, and we understand that the previous auditors are looking into undertaking a value for money assessments for the previous 2 years that they have not yet managed to deliver. So therefore we continue to make progress, in my view. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Unless there are any points of clarification on that, we'll go on to item 17. Questions from members of the council. We have 4, and I think it's worth noting there was a 5th from Councillor Morris that was felt very closely related and a part of the notice of motion that was received first, so it was taken with that. So we go first on to question 1 from Councillor Boatwright Green.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like I'm going to be doing this after every election. But in Wychavon District Council, many people were turned away from voting in a recent general election due to a lack of ID. How many of those turned away returned with appropriate ID? Which areas of the district had the highest numbers of those turned away? And after 3 elections, are we now seeing any patterns that need to be addressed for future elections to ensure anyone who can vote if they wish?
I think a very wise scrutiny of. On to Councillor Christie.
Thank you, Chairman. So, in response to the first of that, in Wychavon District, how many people were turned away from voting? 25 people were turned away from our 72 polling stations, issuing desks, because of a lack of correct ID. So 25 people. How many of those came back with appropriate ID? 15 came back. So we had, you will have worked out, those of you who enjoy mental arithmetic, that we had 10 people across the whole of the constituency. Out of 38,086 electors who voted on the day, 10 people were not able to vote because of voter ID, which is 0.026%. And I just want to say that I think that's a very good result, and a good result that I think I would commend thank our officers and our communications team for achieving, in part because I think they made every effort to encourage people to vote with ID, but also to all of the candidates who I think, from what I saw, also had that on their election literature. And I think 10 people is actually an excellent result. So to the question that Dan raised, after 3 elections, are we now seeing any patterns that need to be addressed for future elections? I think in short, the answer is no. We've had similar tiny numbers for all 3 elections now. Having said that, we obviously don't want to turn anyone away, so we'll keep on raising awareness about voter ID and indeed about voter registration and voting methods. Anyone who has any questions, suggestions or concerns in these matters is very welcome to contact the Wychavon Elections team or email elections@wychavon.gov.uk, and the election team number is 01386 565 437. Thank you.
Thank you. An important scrutiny. I find I'm always looking for the number of spoiled ballots. You have a right to a supplementary question if you'd like.
I noted the sentence 25 turned away from issuing desks. The reason I asked this question is I was asked before whether I had my ID with me. Are we actually recording the number of people at that point that are don't have their ID, rather than the ones going as far as the issuing desk? Because it would be useful to know whether those people are also returning, because it's just there was definitely 2 phases to my ID being checked.
I'll invite our monitoring officer to.
So we followed the government guidance and the guidance from the Electoral Commission, which was to have an extra poll clerk at every station. So if you recall, we used to have a presiding officer and 1 poll clerk. So for the last 3 elections, we've had 2 poll clerks, and we've had 1 outside to stop people queuing if they haven't got the right ID. And we don't record the people sent away at the first entrance point, because that's not data that we're asked to collect. And if you can imagine, on the day, those 3 people have lots to do and lots to record.
Thank you. So this brings us on to question 2 from Councillor Wilkins.
The Raven is an extremely important building to the people of Droitwich. Its history runs deep not only within the town, but within this very council, as it is where our constitution was signed in 1974. It saddens me to bring news that after the first hole and first police order were issued, which most of you, I believe, are aware of, a second hole and subsequently a second police order have been issued regarding the Raven to the developer. Weather is now getting inside the Grade 2 listed building in multiple locations, and the recent security improvements seem to have had little effect. I ask this council if it has received any concrete assurances that the Ravens roof will undergo works to protect it for this coming winter, and furthermore, I ask this council to be given monthly access to the building. Can we be given monthly access to the building for our heritage team and other relevant officers to ensure the structural integrity of the building? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and I believe we have a response.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkins. If I may make a response to your question. We've been told by the developer on behalf of the owner that the repairs to the roof will be carried out and are being arranged. We're also aware of the community protection notice warning, which has been issued by the police regarding additional security to prevent trespass. We understand from the developer that improvements to security are being arranged. Access to the building by council officers has never been denied, and in any event we have certain powers of entry if necessary. We're monitoring the situation closely and will take action utilising the council's powers if and when appropriate.
So you have a supplementary question.
I wish to ask, when was the building last visited by officers, and were any exact dates given by the developer as to when these repairs and when the security improvements would be completed?
Thank you. I can't give you a date as to when the officers went, but they went when it was appropriate to go. I would also like to point out and say to you that your love of the Raven and your tenacity of bringing it here today, I think will encourage the developer to show their mettle for the safeguarding the building and arresting further deterioration. And to this end, a letter has been sent today to Mr. Singh, the developer, setting out the statutory powers we are considering using to protect this building.
And thank you for raising that. As someone who does pass the Raven 3-4 times a week, it's a site that creates damage in the town. This brings us next on to question 3. Councillor Tucker. Pardon me. Councillor Andy Dyke first.
Thank you very much, Chairman. With regard to what was just talked about the Raven there, can that letter be made public?
The issues will be made public at appropriate time.
So, unless there are further, we'll go on to question 3 from Councillor Charles Tucker.
Thank you, Chairman. Severn Trent sewage pumping station in Wyre Road, Pershore, has caused odour nuisance for several years and is insufferable to local residents in summer months. This has been reported on many occasions to the Water Company and also to Worcester Regulatory Services. 180, in fact more than 180, houses have been built nearby in recent years, and there are new proposals for another 35 immediately beside the pump station. How will the Council work with Severn Trent to ensure odours are properly controlled in future?
Thank you. I believe we have a response.
Thank you for the question. I have every sympathy for the residents who have had to suffer this situation. Worcester Regulatory Services have confirmed they have received a small number of complaints in recent years, and every one has been passed to Severn Trent. Unfortunately, district councils do not have the power to act on odour nuisance using the Environmental Protection Act of 1990 in cases such as this. Pumping stations form part of the sewer network, and the sewers are not considered premises under the Act. It's only sewage treatment works themselves that are premises and can be addressed using this legislation. There are no other suitable powers that are available to the Worcestershire Regulatory Services. However, I will undertake to meet with the relevant officers in an attempt to identify an alternative approach that may be more effective.
And you have a right to a supplementary question if you'd like.
Thank you. Some years ago, probably 20 years ago, there was great concern about odour from Worcester Sewage Works, and odour suppressants were established as the solution to that. I note the point that has been made about a sewage pumping station not being a premises, but I find that hard to accept. Chairman, this is an issue which must have a solution. And the fact that we have had no success with Severn Trent and no success with WRS is not really an adequate reason to say that Wychavon can do nothing about it. I think that, as you have actually said just a moment ago, other ways can be looked at, and I do hope that that will be the case. And we'll, both myself and Jodie Arnold will be very, very happy to work with you to establish a way of going forward. But I'm particularly concerned about the fact that there is a new planning application for 35 houses immediately adjacent to the pumping station. And if the problems that we have had now are significant and insufferable in the summer, I think that building another 35 houses next door is likely to create a substantial additional issue for local residents. And I would like to ask another question then. Can this question of odour nuisance become a material consideration in the determination of the planning application? Well, it hasn't yet come in. Well, it has. We have got that planning application, and I'd like to know if we can make the question of odour a material consideration in its determination.
So just to confirm, Councillor Tucker, just to confirm, is that a general question, or is that a question? Is that a general question about about odour being a public nuisance as a material planning consideration, or is that a question about a specific application?
I'm making this question is relating specifically to the pumping station at Wire Road and the odour nuisance that it causes in the immediate vicinity, and obviously then the consequences of having that same odour or an increased odour when there are 35 new houses being built next door to it. So it's a material consideration in the consideration of that application.
It's inappropriate for us to discuss here a live planning application that will come before the planning committee, and any member of the planning committee cannot make a comment because they will be predetermined in their position. So I don't think it's appropriate to answer that question.
I think if you'd like more detail on more general what is and isn't a planning consideration, I'm sure our planning officers would be happy to talk further with you.
My understanding, Chairman, is that any matter, and certainly matters of pollution, air pollution or water pollution, can be material considerations.
I hope so, but for I think further detail on specific planning considerations, visit the planning department. So with that, unless there are any other further comments, brings us on to item 18, the council debate.
No, got a question.
Oh,
missed one.
Apologies there. So this brings us on to the fourth question, nearly missed, from Councillor Dawkes.
Thank you. Could the leader, following his interview with the BBC, where he welcomed Chancellor Rachel Reeves' statement to target building 10,000 houses at pace at Worcestershire Parkway, assure us and all our residents that he will strongly oppose this unless it is fully compliant with the extensive consultation and community engagement carried out during the SWDPR process. My understanding of that undertaking being that the Worcestershire Parkway will set a new standard for creating a new settlement whereby developers will fund and build the infrastructure, schools, shops, etc., prior to building the houses, thus providing a new settlement with all the required infrastructure to absorb the vast majority of the housing numbers for South Worcestershire, which will then protect our villages from becoming towns, our towns becoming cities, and our countryside and green fields from being lost forever. Can you fully assure me that this will not become lost as an additional number of housing units, leaving the South Worcestershire councils, which will predominantly be Wychavon, to find an additional 10,000 homes in addition to the allocations in the SWDPR?
Thank you. I believe we have a response.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, and thank you, Nick, for the question. I'm very happy to be able to expand on the brief announcement that was made by the Chancellor in her speech. As you all know, she name-checked 4 sites, in fact, across the country, ours being one, North Stowe in Cambridgeshire, which was originally Conservative but has been Lib Dem run since 2018. Then 2 Labour sites, one in Liverpool and one, the urban extension in Birmingham. And in her speech, she mentioned that she would be offering help to all 4 of those sites by providing more planners. We hope that was an offer across the whole of the country, 300 planning officers to come forward. But also, she was wanting to speed things up, I think is the way that she would have described it. I think the first thing to note is this is our plan. Yeah? So this is the plan summary that I got in 2019 when I was a fairly new councillor, the preferred options consultation. It was a plan which said that the government had told us that we needed to build 14,000 additional homes in this area by 2041. And if you turn over the page, the main site is Parkway. And it was supposed to deliver 5,000 homes by 2041 with the potential for a further 5,000 after that. So it's our plan. It is not Labour's plan, particularly. It is our plan. But my view is that when somebody comes along and says, I'm willing to help you deliver your plan, it seems a little bit churlish, surely, to say, well, no, thanks, I don't like you because you happen to belong to a different political colour to me. I think one of the lessons that we need to all remember, and I think it was said in the prayers earlier, that we're here to serve our residents, irrespective of which political party we support. It's the residents we look after first, and then ourselves and our parties second, I would have thought. And from that perspective, I can say I think this is the right thing for residents. When I look at the room here, I know that, for example, Councillor Grady is very concerned about further development in Droitwich. I think that would be shared by all of the Droitwich members. I know that Councillor Dyke is concerned about the over-expansion of Evesham. I think that would be shared by all of the Evesham members. Over the last 6 weeks, I had the pleasure of going around all the beautiful and wonderful villages that we've got here, some that I'd not been to before, I have to say. They too do not need and do not deserve to be over-expanded. But it's worth remembering that even in our original plan, there was some expansion predicted for those places. So it's not a complete answer for all of that. It won't mean that nothing is going to be built anywhere, I'm afraid, but it is a massive part of the plan. So if the second most powerful person in the government comes along and says, I'm going to help you with your plan, my answer to that is, thank you very much, do come down. As soon as we can have a meeting, so much the better. And I'll give her a free copy of this document, which is our design code, which is specific to the area around Pershore. And if you've not had a chance, those of you to look through it, the officers and Create Streets did a fantastic job in pulling out not only the beauty that we've already got here in terms of the design quality in and around our villages, but also recommendations as to how we can create a really great settlement in Parkway. So my view is the opportunity is there for us. We need to grab it with both hands. And by doing so, we then have central government actually on the hook to deliver what we need in Wychavon. Thank you.
Thank you. And you have a right to a supplementary question if you'd like.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much for that explanation. That's good. Thank you.
And with that, unless there's any further on that question, this does actually bring us to item 18, being the council debates. Councillor Boatwright-Green.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies to Mel for having to kind of get my mad ramblings into something of something vaguely coherent. Unfortunately, this came, I think, about 3 days after the general election, and I have to say I'm not entirely sure I was completely 100% focused. But it did happen at a time when I was actually doing quite a detailed review of elections in general. And having been involved now in 3 local elections as a candidate and also in my current job working for Stratford Lib Dems, also being involved in the Police and Crime Commissioner election recently, which was an eye-opener in terms of the levels of scrutiny that a female candidate can sometimes experience from fellow candidates, not from any party represented here, thankfully, and also being involved in a general election. It got me thinking about kind of the way in which we are represented and who is representing us and what we can actually do as communities to get better representation for everyone in our communities. And I think the thing that I found a little bit frustrating about the general election in particular was the story was not about getting 2 Lib Dem MPs elected who I had worked for. It was the fact that they were the first women to hold those positions, which I found particularly frustrating because they should in their own right be appreciated for the fact that they are going to be 2 fantastic MPs. The fact that they happen to be, one of them is the first Liberal Democrat MP for that constituency ever, brilliant. But it was actually, the conversation really was about their gender. But when I started to break it down and actually looking at the data behind it, it was very obvious that one of the reasons why this was such an important aspect of what had happened was actually looking at the numbers behind it. And the one that stunned me was that 2019 report. Unfortunately, the District Council network and the County Council ones and the unitary lot haven't got all the data together for the latest one yet, so I couldn't use that. But it was the fact that it was 78% of local government workforce was women, but only 17% of the leaders were women. And then when I started to break down my own experience of being in councils, I very quickly realised that actually female representation in general has been quite low. It's also particularly low in my age group and younger. And I found that when I started looking at Wychavon and Worcestershire County Council in particular, there are plenty of men of my age and younger, and yet actually getting female representation in younger age groups has been an incredible challenge. And I was very lucky to be invited to, during COVID actually, I think it was because we were all kind of realising that the online systems would be quite useful. I was invited to a Zoom for 50-50 organisation, trying to get 50% of Parliament to be female. And I was, I think, one of 2 men on the call. And it really highlighted some of these issues that I had not thought about, bearing in mind that I have a number of friends and family who are my age and in kind of family environments, the barriers that people were facing in order to get themselves elected. There was also the interesting one that you have to ask a woman 7 times to get elected. That's always stuck in my head. And I'm not going to lie, I can say statistically speaking that has been accurate. And also trying to get people into leadership positions as well and actually getting them to kind of focus on doing this has been a challenge. The one I've thought was a bit harder to quantify, and I don't think there is any data out there that I could find that was particularly meaningful, was looking at kind of social background and educational work-life experiences. Liberal Democrats are notoriously kind of degree educated, and it was one of those that I actually found myself saying, it's great that we've got so many people that are degree educated, but how many people do we have who've actually gone through the apprenticeships, who are then councillors, who are then going to these meetings and actually talking about their experience of apprenticeships? So it was one when we started looking at our how we were going to kind of get people elected in 23, both in my own group and also in Stratford. I found myself saying, yes, okay, do we have people who've had different work experiences? People who've had different social backgrounds, people who've lived in social housing. And thankfully, we were actually able to find people who were in the party who had actually, experienced these, but they hadn't actually come forward to say they wanted to run for office. A lot of them, they were in the party, but we actually had to go and find them. And it turns out actually having those conversations meant we actually started to find people who hadn't necessarily thought about standing, had been helping people stand and helping people get elected, but actually hadn't necessarily put themselves forward. And so this is one of those where this is on the forefront of my mind at the moment, and it's something that I am going to be thinking about as we're heading towards county elections next year. And then hopefully in 2026 we have no elections and I can have a year off. That would be quite nice. Maybe, do something else, maybe a holiday, who knows. But the one I really want to kind of focus on here is how we can actually try to make sure that we are kind of representing, as elected officials, kind of our communities as well as we can.
Thank you very much. I believe it's on to the leader.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I'm just contemplating the thought of Councillor Boatwright Green taking any kind of holiday from politics and finding this extremely hard to reconcile in my head, but I'll hold him to his word. Hopefully he will get one. I think I welcome the idea of having this debate. I mean, I think it's a serious question, actually, isn't it? How do we get representation across all types of people, not just women, I'd suggest, in our council? And if we were just to focus in on women, and this is what this debate does for now, I think some of the information that's been supplied to me by our officers is worth reflecting on. And that is the information that we have as Wychavon as an employer, not the council for a second, but just Wychavon as an employer. So let me give you a few thoughts on that. We have 63% of our workforce are female and 37% are male. And within those, on the senior management team, 50% are female and 50% are male in Wychavon. And for the heads of service, which is the next level down, 15 in total, 7 are female, so 47%, and 8 are male. And of these, 4 females work either a condensed or part-time hours week. 18 of the workforce are currently registered as disabled. That's 6.7%, though the figure is possibly higher, as employees do not always declare this. So, we're actually living and working in the midst of an employer that actually meets a lot of the things that Councillor Boatwright Green was expressing in terms of an ideal. In other words, it's pretty much 50-50, male, female, and it has a good balance of people from who are registered as disabled. How does that happen? Well, here's some of the things that we do as an employer. We offer some posts up to a certain number of hours a week. Now, of course, that's not ever going to happen for councillors, I'm afraid. We all know what the up to means on that. It's a lot, and it tends to come in clumps. I completely appreciate that. And you can't predict it. And you probably always feel like you have to answer the phone whenever you are rung. We all face those difficulties. But the council offers up to a certain number of hours. It allows part-time applicants to request working hours across a number of days to make up total hours. It advertises across a range of job sites. It allows flexible working requests. It makes documents on our website accessible, and it offers access to work adjustments and support. In other words, it's very flexible in terms of how you can work here. In terms of education, we have democracy days. I've attended one. It was fantastic. And we got quite a lot of young girls there as well as boys. It was a mixed group that represented all of the schools, I was pleased to see. Employees undertaking voluntary roles as enterprise advisors and mentors in local schools, attending careers fairs, supporting careers events in schools, e.g. mock interviews, and facilitating work experience. And we've got in our midst today, we've got Katie, who is actually someone who's been through an apprenticeship with us, who joined us from school, was in the elections team and has just finished her level 1 apprenticeship and won an award in so doing. So congratulations to you on doing that, Katie. So I think one other factor, health and well-being. Here are some of the things that you're missing by not working for Wychavon. Paid assessments for staff who are neurodiverse, have ergonomic needs, and then implementing support plans for the workplace. Menopause cafe, dementia and carers awareness support sessions. Prostate awareness sessions, access to EAP, counselling and private occupational health, GPs, free health MOTs and PSA testing, paid time to attend medical appointments via GP referral or for maternity. And initiatives we support disability confident, inclusive leaders at Worcestershire Armed Forces Covenant. Now, I'm sorry, I'm not going to offer all of those things to all councillors. I'm afraid that's not within my gift as leader. It might not be in the budget either. However, I think, to come back to the thrust of what Dan was saying, we need to make the environment as being a councillor as attractive as possible for all people. And, you know, I think he's right in saying, in particular for women, because we are underrepresented, particularly by younger women, particularly by women who are working. And we need to reflect on what do we do to make that better. And as the leader of the council, I can promise you I will listen sincerely and carefully to any idea that anyone here comes forward with. And it will be based, you know, it will be looked at on its merits, and if we can afford to do it and if it makes sense, we will do it. Because it does make sense, you know, to have a council that is representative of the wider population that we've got. All is not lost, though. I mean, we have had in the past a reasonable number of female councillors. Not as many as we would like, I think. We're currently at 16 out of 43, so a long way off 50%. We have had female leaders of the council. We've had chairman, we've had vice chairman, we've had a lot of executive board members in their time who were women, and they've all done, you know, a great job, but we just simply don't have enough of them coming through the door. Why not? Well, I can only give you my one thought, and that is that we need to make sure that the environment feels right for all of us to have a good discussion. I think we need to always take really seriously the Nolan rules and principles, and we need to recognise that debate and not hate is really the way forward in any democracy. And whilst at times, you know, I think we inevitably perhaps might lose our sense of direction and become overly passionate about one thing or another, I think if you're a young woman looking in at the council and asking yourself the question, do I want to be here? Do I want to spend my evenings here? And do I want to work with these people? You're going to look at that behaviour and you're going to ask yourself the question, does that reflect me or not? And I hope that we will always be able to answer it by saying, yes, you know, it's actually really good behaviour, and yes, we're always doing it in the best way possible. So my first thought would be we have to look to ourselves. The way we treat each other is the way that other people will judge us, and it's the way they will assess whether or not they want to be part of that team. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we head to Councillor Emma Stokes.
Thank you. I'm always intrigued whenever we have a representation of 50% of the community and it's not represented in a particular council. But both the leader and Councillor Boatwright have identified young women, and I'm sure that includes all of us in this particular room. Thank you very much. Okay. However, what I do see is across the room from the administration, I do see 6 out of the 11 being women of substance, and I see this side only 2 out of 21. So it is certainly something that we do actually need to address, and how we do that is, as you say, sort of ensure that we do represent the community, make sure that whenever a lady wishes to be or represent their area, they are welcomed. However, as with any situation, I would never, ever advocate putting a woman in a position that she didn't deserve. I would never advocate putting any person in a position that they didn't deserve. We are not a legislative gender quota. We don't have that in this country, and I wouldn't support that. I am a firm believer that it needs to be the best person for the job, but we do need to be better represented. Thank you.
Thank you. And I saw Councillor Dan Birch's hand go up next. Sorry, pardon me, I think that's Julie Tucker's, Councillor Julie Tucker's hand first, then Dan Birch, then Andrew Dyke, and then Greg Wilkins.
Is it Julie or Liz?
Pardon me, that's I saw a Tucker, but I wasn't sure who.
It's Liz. It must be Liz. It must be Liz.
Liz. Pardon me, Liz.
Liz.
Pardon me there. Councillor Liz Tucker.
Thank you. Sorry for the confusion. I think it's a a very welcome statement made by our leader, and I appreciate that. But there's a great difference between the staff and people putting themselves forward for councillors. About 30 years ago, I did a survey of all the women councillors in Worcestershire, and a number of practical things came up, not just whether or not they wanted to be councillors and didn't judge themselves not capable, because they always sort of, if you ask a man whether he can do something, they say yes. If you ask a woman, she said, well, I'm not quite sure if I can manage that. And that's something we've got to work on ourselves. But it's a time of day when the meetings are. Probably she's making supper and sorting the children out. It's the fact that we as a council are not providing any allowances because of the extra costs of getting somebody in to sit with the children and that sort of stuff. And it is also to do with making people realise that they probably are good enough for the job if they actually thought it through in detail, and perhaps giving them opportunities before, in the run-up year before elections, to create opportunities, whether it's a special meeting or talk or whatever it is, just to get people's mind thinking. Because we all know that the wider variety of people you've got in a room, the better discussion you should have. And we're talking about women, but the record for people with disabilities is much poorer and much harder to achieve, and would require Wychavon to be creative, I think, in the individual support that different disabilities might require. Thank you.
Thank you. As a note, councillors can claim childcare support back through the usual expenditure claim routes. I believe that falls under carers allowances. This brings, well, next we have Councillor Dan Birch.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to think that we as a Conservative group do all we can to entice women to take on the role of council and council candidates. Unfortunately, some of you in the room chose to stand against them at the last local election. I'm looking at you in particular, Neil. So we did lose some of our female candidates, but we did okay overall. Councillor Boatwright Green alluded to the fact that he doesn't want an election in 2026, but I think the one thing that we found from the general election is it attracts a lot of people into politics. One example, we had a very young volunteer, only 17 years old, from Badsey, who was very keen to come and help us with the general election and has really gained a very strong interest in politics, and this week is spending a week's work experience with Nigel Huddleston. So we are enticing people into politics, and I do think that getting people involved through the associations, especially around election times, is crucial. But most importantly, I think the best way that we can attract people into becoming councillors is by doing a good job ourselves. A lot of people believe, from an outsider perspective, that being a councillor is a hobby job. It's a way to occupy a little bit of time. So I think by demonstrating that you are able to make a key difference in your community and you are able to have a strong impact, does entice people into standing for local office. So I think the best thing that we can do is lead by example, do the best we can and make a good difference to our community. And you should see that people will start to come forward to do the same. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. This brings us next on to Andrew Dyke, and then it will be Greg Wilkins, and then Angie Crump, then Neil Franks, and then unless there's anything really desperate to add on, we'll go back for Paul Middleborough after that, and then we'll go back to the ASCA. Thank you. So, Andrew Dyke.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd just like the leader to perhaps reflect on something that's happened recently. We had 3 ladies on the executive board. We now have 1. Maybe you would like to reflect on that.
I'm happy. I don't know. I'm happy to answer the question. I mean, I think the point has already been well made. You know, we need to choose people for the job depending upon the criteria that we're looking for at the time. And I look for people who are capable, but I also look for people who are open and who believe in teamwork. And I assess them on that basis.
Thank you. And we next go on to Councillor Greg Wilkins.
Okay, I think firstly, I'd like to say that the admittedly jokingly sexist comment about men by Councillor Tucker seems counter to her seeming commitment of creating a safe and encouraging environment. I think representation should never be a focus of any council or group, as it should always be the primary concern to have the best people in any role, whoever they are and wherever they come from. All right, now mark the date for this, because I agree with Councillor Dan Boatwright that a candidate's gender should never be a topic of conversation. There should always be access to any and all who wish to enter local government. I have rarely sought to mention this, but I was raised by a single mother who was on benefits and lived in social housing, which I am still in today. I dropped out of college, and the only private sector job I have ever held was a shelf stacker at Waitrose. I am also mentally disabled. I personally have never experienced any restriction to enter in local government, and in fact have experienced nothing but encouragement, though I will admit this is only my personal experience. I find the statement that only 39.2% of elected councillors are female is an interesting one, as councillors must be publicly elected through political parties. So it seems to me that we as a council have no right or reason to make comments or commitments on how political parties pick their candidates or how the public choose to elect their representatives and who they choose to elect.
Thank you. This brings us... Who's next? Councillor Angie Crump.
Thank you, Chair. Making a slight light of the situation, I was an apprentice. I am a woman. I do have disabilities. I have hearing disabilities. And yes, I probably was asked at least 7 times before I stood. Reasoning behind that was because I didn't think I'd got enough to offer. And I, since being on the council, have realised that I do have things to offer, and it's becoming more and more. As I become more sort of confident and know what I'm doing, then it makes things a lot easier. But I know when I talk to people, and I talk to women who are friends, they're like, I don't know how you can do it. It's a very male-orientated area, and it's usually the older people that do it, because the younger people don't have the time to be able to commit to it, because maybe it's family situations or their job and that type of thing that entails. So I think it is really important that we try and get it across that younger people can get involved and try and make it more accessible for them to be able to do so, because I think the fact that we all have different opinions, and that's fantastic, and by us all having different ages and different abilities or whatever, we all bring a lot of different things to the council, and it makes us a good, strong council that we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Franks.
Thank you. Just in reply to Councillor Birch, obviously back in 2019, I was coordinator of the local party and led the campaign to get the fantastic Julie Tucker elected, and that was a lot of hard work for the team. In 2021, I am not going to claim responsibility for Hannah Robson getting in, but I did stand on a very cold polling station to help out with her election. And in 2023, whilst, yes, I may have been part of defeating a female candidate, I also got the fantastic Nicola Morrison in as well. I would like to say that the Green Group do have 66% female representation, which I think we're very proud of. I think you should calm down, please, and show some respect. Thank you. I'd also like to point out that in the general election, the Greens have now got 4 MPs, and that is 75% female representation. And I do agree that we should have the best people for the job, but we do have, and yet we've got very high female percentages. So I think you should be careful about what you say really on that one. And the last thing I would like to say is, you know, there's a lot of encouragement and providing support, and I do think female candidates often need more because of the responsibilities they can have at home, etc. And we should all take a lesson in how to sort of help. And there's actually a website dedicated to this. It's called elect-her.org.uk. So I suggest all councillors maybe read the reasons why there's such a campaign to help women get elected. Thank you.
Councillor Paul Middleborough.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's very useful debate, this. I'd just like to make 2 comments. I see that I think the figures from NALC refer to parish councils and town and district councils. But that's not to exclude them, because town and parish councils are an important part of our democratic performance in the Shire counties here with 2-tier systems. So I think anything that we can do to encourage CALC to actually look at how people are being chosen for parish councils would be well worth taking on board. The other thing, I've just got to make this comment. I sort of bounce it with Andy. For a few years, I was leader of this council here, and the board I had 6 people, but times were different then, and life wasn't as complicated, of which 3 were men and 3 were women. And I think we did a pretty good job. And of course, Mrs. Tucker was a leader of a far grander council, Hereford and Worcester County Council, a huge council when you look at it. And she did a grand job, although they told you to stop doing it in the end because they abolished you. Anyway, there we are.
So before we return to Councillor Boatwright Green, I'd like to add my few pence. As someone who was raised by a female councillor, an ex-deputy leader of this council. That's going to drive me wild, that is. I think it's hugely important not to diminish the abilities and not to make it just about gender. I think creating opportunity and experience has been a very key note from what a lot have said. Creating those experiences for young people to get involved in their local governments. I know from Droitwich's own youth council has a very even gender split, and I would hope that those who have come to Wychavon's Democracy Day in years past would have noticed the same. And I highly recommend to all in the room to attend the next Wychavon Democracy Day and see some of our young people from around the district speak incredibly about causes they're passionate about. I find that is, in my experience, been the best way to increase the equality of representation across councils. Now we go back to Councillor Dan Boatwright Green to round us up on this debate.
Thank you, Chair. And can I be invited this time? Because last year I only found out about it after this one told me about it. It sounded fun, though. I think the key aspect to this is the best people for the job might not necessarily put themselves forward for it, and we need to encourage them to do so. And talent scouting is needed, it really is, and that's across kind of all political parties, and also if you're not affiliated with a political party. Councillor Wilkins, I will say we have a lot in common in terms of our background, but what I would say is I did not put myself forward. I was happy to help others, but actually the thought of standing for election, I think I was actually asked many, many times, far more than 7, and technically I've never said yes. I mean, I've gone through the entire process, but I never actually, strictly speaking, said yes. I have reflected a lot on why that is, and part of it does come down to the fact that you do leave yourself quite exposed, and as someone with a disability where I do worry about kind of how I might move or how I might speak, it has had a massive impact on what I'm going to do. So I totally understand when people say they don't want to stand, why they'd be a little bit worried about it. It's great that as an employer, we're really kind of pushing forward on getting better representation. That's brilliant. One that does always concern me is that disability number, and 6% is 25% of the general kind of population do actually have a recognised disability, and actually getting people to talk about those disabilities can actually be a challenge. I found myself in one of the most bizarre conversations at County Hall a couple of months ago, where it transpired 3 of us have epilepsy, and not one of us had ever actually spoken to anyone at the council about it. 3 totally different political parties, and as a result of one conversation that I had, all 3 of us ended up declaring to each other the situation we were in. And actually, there was restrictions on kind of things that some of us could do and some of us couldn't, that actually we did need to think about as councillors. I noted that we mentioned how many women were working part-time, but also how many men could be working part-time. I have friends now who are quite happy. They are married to doctors in the case of 2 of them. They are the part-time primary carers. They're very happy doing those jobs. But again, trying to promote that actually, as a lifestyle, they do get quite a lot of flack for it, which I do feel is a little unfair. In terms of what we can do for councillors, Chelmsford, they put a parental leave policy in place for councillors and cabinet members, and this gave people reassurance that they would be supported should they actually be in a situation where they may need to step back for a few months, but they then could then come back to their role once they had obviously given birth or adopted, etc. The carers allowance, it's a great thing that exists, but a councillor really kind of like strongly pointed out to me when I mentioned this. She said, you find a carer. You find a carer at these times. You find someone who's available at that time. And I actually found myself thinking, you've got a valid point there, actually. I know that I could probably call on family members, but actually there is a struggle there. Probably the only thing me and Michael Gove ever agreed on, and I'm only going to say this now because he's gone, the geographies of gender, that we still have that disparity in, and it's also we have the geographies of disability as well. And this idea that actually certain groups of people still dominate certain parts of our geographies. And we do need to recognise that, even if it's not necessarily deliberate. As men, you can put the supper on as well. Just thought I'd respond to that one when it's but women want to put the supper on. We can do that. I can cook. It's all good. But one of the things I will kind of like really want to push was something I found quite interesting in the 2023 election was Broadway, Charles Wickham and Sedgemoor, 80% of the ballot was female. Pinvin, 100% was female. But they stood out as the exceptions. There were plenty of seats where if Angie hadn't won or Liz hadn't won, where actually male representation would have been a lot higher. And actually, when you look at those kind of disparities in the way in which our election was going on, there's actually a few seats could have turned this to an even greater number of men sat in the room. And I don't have disability numbers in terms of our councillors, but what I can say, it's great that there is more of us talking about it. So that is massively appreciated, because one of the things I found incredibly frustrating over the last 5 years is a number of people who tried to shout me down, more at county than here, over the fact that I am raising issues about being disabled, because actually I'm doing that so that I know that the next person who's sitting in this chair after you've got rid of me, they actually will have an easier time. And I think this is something that we do need to recognise, is these conversations and these debates is about making sure that the next people after us do have an easier time of it. And you never know, we could get to 50-50, and I'm sure they will deserve it, whoever is elect. No, that felt awkward, and I didn't like that. But I'm sure when it's all 100% Lib Dem, of course, then we'll actually have a system where it will be fairer. But what I would say is plenty of people who do deserve to be elected never get elected, partly because of their political party or just circumstance. I think, though, that we do all need to respect the fact that there will be plenty of people out there who won't put themselves forward. So maybe we spend a bit more time trying to find them.
Thank you for that debate, and thank you all for coming. I believe this draws us to a close, and I bid you all a good night.